Welcome everyone to our COVID-19 Crisis Response Funders webinar and discussion. My name is Dana Gunders. I'm the Executive Director at ReFED, and I first just want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I know that during this time, it's really caused me to reflect on all the things that I am fortunate for right now, and one of those things is that as part of ReFED, I'm really able to have my work be part of the solution here, at least a small part of a solution to what's such an enormous problem. And I know many of you on the call feel the same way, and that's why you're taking the time to be here with us. So I just really want to appreciate that and look forward to having you be part of the discussion, both as part of this webinar and beyond today. In case you are not familiar with ReFED, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce the organization. ReFED works to motivate and mobilize the multiple stakeholders across the food system to activate solutions to reduce food waste. And as a central nonprofit serving the space, we view ourselves as a catalyst promoting solutions-driven action, as a convener facilitating collaborations and partnerships between stakeholders, and as a clearinghouse disseminating insights, data, and best practices. And our hope is that we can do all three of those things today during this webinar and discussion. I'll be joined today by Alexandra Quarry, ReFED's Capital and Innovation Director. She'll be sharing some inspiring stories from organizations out in the field who have been figuring out how to adapt to COVID-19. As we all know, COVID-19 has affected every part of our lives and our communities, and I extend my sincerest hopes that for you all and your families, you're remaining healthy and stay safe during this time. Today we're here to talk about the pandemic's impact on our food system and specifically its impact on food waste. The country's collective response to COVID-19 has increased the amount of food waste, and in many cases that wasted food or potentially wasted food can be going to people, and that's really where the nexus of this work lies right now. As you know, many more Americans have become food insecure. The numbers are staggering. I saw today that something like 6 million people have put in job claims, 10 times that of the highest record on number from 1982. And so the need that's being created is truly unprecedented right now. Some of the things we've observed are that food donations, spiked initially, but are tapering off. There's consistently been report of labor and volunteer shortages that make it difficult to address this demand. And then, of course, new precautions that are having to be taken around COVID-19. But what's been inspiring is that organizations are figuring out how to make it work. There's so much just pivoting and innovation on the ground right now. And so we want to both summarize for you kind of what we're seeing in the food system, but also share how organizations are overcoming some of the new challenges that they're facing, and highlight for you how you can be a part of helping to be part of those solutions. So before I begin, I do want to invite Jesse Fink, the chairman of ReFED's board, to say just a few words. And I see he's on the phone now. So Jesse, I'll pass it to you.
Great. Thank you, Dana. We'll see how my technical skills can you hear me? Give me a
We can hear you just fine, yes.
I should tell everybody, Dana and I do Zooming quite often, but this is a much larger audience, so I want to make sure my technical skills are up to par. So I'll just say a few words. I want to thank Dana and the entire ReFED team for rallying to keep those in need as a result of the COVID-19 crisis in mind. And by ReFED, by sharing the insights and convening stakeholders, including this webinar today, and you're providing specific opportunities in need of funding. I also want to thank all the participants on the call. I hope you're all weathering the sad crisis as best as possible. I know your time is precious, and I'm grateful that you're taking the hour to join ReFED today. In times of crises, philanthropic funders look to trusted sources for insights and guidance as they decide where their funds will make the most impact. ReFED is one of those trusted sources, and I know the information they will share today and throughout the crisis will be valuable to the funders on the call. ReFED has been deeply engaged in working on data and insights on the food waste system and getting food to people in need. As a philanthropic funder myself, I feel the need to contribute even more now of my time and money to organizations. I already support organizations and looking at those who are right there in the middle of the crisis. I also am looking for insights from others, and I'm excited to hear on this call of what other organizations would benefit from my support. I encourage you all to listen to Dana's presentation and then to share your own insights as how we as funders can best help ReFED reach those in need. Thank you again, and please stay healthy. I'm going to turn it back to Dana, and I just want to say I'm so pleased that Dana is at the helm as ReFED's executive director. For those of you who don't know Dana, she is a longtime food waste champion. She's a thought leader and a person, and you'll see it today, who can take complex information and turn it into digestible insights. I really have the greatest confidence that Dana will guide ReFED through this turbulent time in a way that is in line with our mission and helps those in need right now. And we continue to work on solutions for the food system that will make the entire food system more resilient in the long term. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you for that, Jesse. Tall order, I will try to fill it.
You will.
So as you can see here on the screen, really what we'd like to do today is just share with you some of our observations from kind of a review and analysis that we've done of what's happening right now. Tell you a little bit about what we at ReFED are trying to do to be part of that solution. And then I'll turn it over to Alex to talk about what we're hearing from the food recovery organizations on the ground that we've worked with, and both some of the themes and also some specific opportunities for projects that need immediate funding right now. We'll also follow this webinar up not only with a recording of this, but also with a list of those fundable opportunities, not just the ones mentioned on the call today, but we've actually assembled a much broader list for you. We'd also like to save some time for discussion. So as you can see, there are some questions here on the screen. They're really just meant to be prompts, but we would like to hear from you and for you to hear from each other about, perhaps some of the funding opportunities that you've seen and would recommend, or other best practices, challenges, or ways that ReFED could be helpful. In general, my observation is that waste seems to be low priority right now, but food is very high priority. And as it should be, people are even higher priority. And so that is kind of sending certain signals through the system in the way that people are responding. And there's no doubt that there is, whole pots of food going to waste around the food system right now. And I think the food industry is doing its best to donate food, but they're also focused on taking care of their businesses and their employees and dealing with a variety of new complexities that have been introduced by the coronavirus pandemic. There is a huge amount of volatility right now, and that means that some of the solutions that we've kind of leaned on and really promoted in the past just simply don't apply right now. If you take something like using artificial intelligence in forecasting, for instance, that's a solution that I think has huge promise in normal times, but right now, trying to rely on old patterns to predict the type of demand that's going to happen over the next few months, it just wouldn't work. And so I think there's some challenges that we know are out there that we may or may not have solutions for, but that are really different right now than typical times. And some of what you'll hear on this call is about waste, but a lot of it is kind of beyond the standard scope of our work, and that's just because we, as many people right now, are kind of putting our usual work aside and just trying to figure out how we can be most helpful. And one of the ways that we found is by really trying to communicate what we're learning to people like you. And certainly one of the things that we're hearing is the need for funding. And that's why we thought it'd be really valuable to bring funders together, not only to learn about what's happening, but to really hear about some of the needs and projects that we're hearing about. So to begin, just to summarize kind of what we've done, you'll hear sort of our observations from doing this. So we have been on over 20 different meetings and webinars over the last few weeks to discuss different action plans or themes people are seeing or needs that they're having. We conducted our own qualitative survey with about 80 respondents, some of them food businesses, some of them food recovery organizations, and others just players within the food ecosystem at large. And I think in the highest level themes, oh, I'm sorry, and then we also have been reviewing news and had a whole set of individual conversations and email exchanges and outreach that everyone on our staff has been experiencing. And I think some of the highest level themes to come out of that are that this abrupt closure of food service, restaurants, hospitality has just led to this instant, unexpected excess in the food supply chain. As I mentioned, there's a lot of efforts to donate that food, but it's overwhelmed the food donation system. And certainly in a lot of cases, it may be going to waste. Next, e-commerce is just exploding. From the smallest little CSAs or small farm shop type of direct to consumer approaches all the way up through big e-commerce. It's completely exploding. And I think that's kind of something that I've put a pin in my head to think about when we really start to look at what are the long-term effect of this pandemic and the altered behaviors on waste, because I think e-commerce has some pretty interesting implications for waste reduction. Also, yes, there was kind of this initial spike in food donations, but many food assistance organizations are experiencing just unprecedented amounts of demand. I saw in one example in South Florida that there was a line of cars 8 miles long outside of a food pantry where they were just putting groceries directly into the trunks of cars. And some are experiencing 6 times the amount of demand that they're used to. And so while food donations will be helpful, those organizations providing food are going to need to buy a lot of that food, and that's going to cost money that they oftentimes don't have, in addition to having to pack it in a new way now and transport it sometimes in different ways as well. And as I mentioned, while food is high priority right now, I think waste is pretty low, and this could have implications for packaging that I think will be true for years to come. Whereas 2 months ago, plastic bag bans were being pushed in reusable bags in grocery stores. Now, I know at least where I am, you're not even allowed to bring in a reusable bag. So that's kind of a separate issue, but tangentially one that I think we'll see happening. So what I thought we'd do today is kind of walk you through the food system and talk about a little bit of what we're observing at each stage of the food system. So to begin with, on farms, waste is increasing significantly on farms, again, from that sort of instant drop in demand. Many farms have multiple channels they're selling through, some of that retail, some of that food service. And, just in one example, we saw that in Florida, 2 million pounds of green beans, 4 million pounds of cabbage, and 10 million pounds of tomatoes were going to be tilled under into the ground because they simply just did not have outlets to sell that. And of course, these are perishable products. Sometimes just a day or two late, adjusted schedule and harvest means you miss the window. And so the timing of this can be really sensitive for some crops, again, kind of leading to those crops just not leaving the field. Farmers markets are also closing, and so we're seeing that some of those smaller farmers are having difficulties. Sorry to go out of order there. There's a rise in e-commerce, so some of that direct-to-consumer channels that farmers are looking for, and consumers are also looking for, right? That they want fresh food in these times, and where there are options to get that fresh from farmers, they're taking those options. And then there's this issue of supply risk that has kind of multiple levels to it. So there is a lot of articles and concern going around farm labor shortages, both from immigration restrictions, but also from risk of illness to employees, and those that are doing the harvesting and planting. We are entering the planting season right now for a lot of crops. And so if there's a shortage in planting, certainly that could lead to food shortages later. There's also a concern over food shortages from exports, or rather crops that we typically import, because similar dynamics could be happening in other countries. And also you have some countries looking at trade restrictions or export restrictions to preserve food for their own populations. There has been some assistance. The stimulus bill, I think, had about $9.5 billion towards kind of immediate disaster assistance for farmers, but it's not entirely clear exactly what that will go to. So that's kind of a little sense of what's going on farms. Moving on to kind of processing and manufacturing, certainly for kind of your big brands, especially those doing non-perishables, we're hearing a huge increase in demand, 2 to 3 times normal demand, from some of that stocking up behavior that's going on. At the same time, those processing facilities, manufacturing facilities can have people fairly close together. And there have already been several that have had to close because of at least one employee that was sick. So PepsiCo announced the closure of its Frito-Lay site in California, as well as its Quaker oat production lines, because of employees that had contracted the virus. So that, combined with challenges around, physically, how plants are organized, and if social distancing becomes a problem, some of those things could affect production. In a kind of more positive side, we are seeing especially alcohol manufacturers shifting to create hand sanitizer and things like that. We are also, however, seeing that we've heard kind of anecdotally that there are some smaller operations that are closing, or at least for the time being. And specifically, we've heard from some upcycling companies who are using byproducts from those processors that they are experiencing shortages, and that's creating a challenge for their business in producing, whatever flour they make from spent grains or something like that. Distributors, I think, are actually in a really interesting situation right now. I think in many cases, they are the ones who are sort of holding on to the excess. So you have a lot of canceled orders from food service and hospitality, and the distributors are the ones kind of stuck with that product. So we've heard about United Airlines canceling an order of 40,000 of their cheese snack trays, and the distributor just kind of sitting there with those packs. Another where movie theaters are canceling their orders for popcorn kernels, right, because they're all closing. And then you have a place like Cisco, one of the largest distributors in the country, who typically mostly serves restaurants. They're actually switching to try to sell more into and actively kind of right now looking for new retail channels for their product, as well as trying to assist some of the restaurants, smaller restaurants they work with, in solving for some of the challenges that they're now facing in order to continue having that channel for Cisco to sell to. Retail, as many of you may have read, is experiencing a huge demand surge for the month of March. So Kroger cited in a recent business update that they have a 30% increase this March compared to last year, and others as well. Albertsons is actually hiring 30,000 new employees right now in a really neat partnership where they're actually partnering with some food service and hospitality companies who have had to furlough workers to hire up those workers. So they're partnering with Hilton and MGM and others to provide some employment for their furloughed workers. It's kind of neat. E-commerce has spiked significantly at the retail level. One estimate is that it doubled in a recent report. Average daily online sales for grocery doubled in the middle of March compared with the start of the month. And at the same time, you're having retailers having to, create these new models around curbside pickup that they perhaps didn't before, or experiencing a huge increase in desire for that service or delivery, where they're kind of struggling to fulfill those orders and are days out in meeting people's needs. And so when you think about what does that mean for a consumer who's trying to figure out how they shop, and if they can only order 5 days in advance or something like that. Volumes are shifting from food service to retail. So there are some in the produce industry who are actually trying to matchmake between food service and retail in order to take some of that surplus that food service is holding on to and have it sold to retail in a way that can meet some of retail's increased demand. And then there's a huge volatility in sales expected. I think, as I was saying at the beginning, it's really hard for those retailers to predict right now what demand is going to look like over the next few months. And that challenge in forecasting is a huge driver of waste. Lastly, I think there could be a potential long-term shift toward eating more at home, and we are hearing that predicted by some of the retailers. And I think that has, again, interesting implications for consumers, for the end consumption in terms of teaching cooking skills and things like that at the home level could lead to waste reduction eventually. Restaurants and food service, there was this huge spike of food surplus. All of these places are closing. And I think there's been a giant scramble from this side of the industry to figure out how to make the best of the food that they had on hand. How do they change their operations to stay open in some capacity? Many are shifting to these takeout options. Some are shifting to change over their kitchens to making meals for food insecure or for some of the medical workers out there. But certainly kind of the biggest story here is on mass closures. And you have some thought leaders in the industry just saying this stop in the economy is going to just crush small independent restaurants. And as just to give you kind of a small sense of the need there, the James Beard Foundation has started a relief fund where they're giving out $15,000 to restaurants who, small independent restaurants, to kind of help tide them over. They opened the application 2 days ago. They opened the application at 3 p.m. They had to close down the site at 6 p.m. because they had already received 4,200 applications for these grants and couldn't meet any more of the need to date. So I think that's just, and the implication of all of those restaurants closing, I mean, just from as an eater is and just in terms of like the variety in our diets and all of the culinary creativity and all of that, I think could be huge implications here. And from a waste perspective, I'm not sure that I really had the chance to think through what it might mean. Lastly, consumers. As we all know, there's kind of this huge hoarding happening this month. I would like to say that with people cooking at home, there could be kind of less waste overall. I think that could be true in the long term as people are kind of forced to learn cooking skills and learn how to manage the food. And certainly if we see food shortages, they're going to learn much more so. I should clarify, I don't think we're going to see overall food shortages. I think we'll see them in very specific products. So not that we're looking at like a mass food insecurity for the whole country situation. But I do think some of those, you know, the force me to cook, I'm seeing it in my own husband, who has never been cooking before and is now learning how to make lasagna and things like that. So I do think some of that increased skill could in the long term lead to waste reduction. However, I do worry that with all the hoarding, bulk buying, and kind of this desire to not shop too much and to limit the amount that people are going to stores, that we will see that they don't know how to manage so much food at once, and that actually, unfortunately, some of that hoarded food or some of the leftovers made from them cooking that could in fact lead to more waste. And I know that in both San Francisco and New York, they've seen a huge uptick in the compost collection and the food scrap collection that they do because people are cooking more at home. So just to kind of conclude here, in our qualitative survey, we asked people kind of what were the key challenges that were affecting them, primarily in trying to donate food. And this is what we saw, you know, the same themes coming up over and over again. Food transport, labor, funding, and then the fear that there will be food shortages in the food assistance world, right? And those trying to provide food for the food insecure as time goes on and some of this initial spike in donations runs out. And also kind of a limitation in cold storage. And that comes in when these big influxes of food are coming into the food banks and food pantries and they don't really have the way to store it. So with that, that's kind of the snapshot we wanted to give you. We certainly can include questions on this as part of the discussion, but I want to make sure we have plenty of time to cover what we're seeing specifically in the food recovery world and food assistance world and some of the opportunities we're seeing. So with that, I will pass it over to Alex to take it from here.
Great, thanks, Dana. If you want to move forward on the next slide. Yeah, so at ReFED, you know, what we've been doing to really deal with and provide the support that we can do in the space have to focus in 4 main areas. So what we're doing includes creating opportunity lists around food recovery. So really connecting food supplies with demand as much as we can and as much as we have visibility into. 2, bringing best practice discussion series to those stakeholders and those players that are really needed to help kind of take action in this space. And we'll be launching those in the coming weeks. So for those that you are interested, keep an eye out for that. 3rd, we're doing action-oriented communications, just, you know, like we're doing right now, trying to get this information and the insights that we're seeing out to those that need to know it. And then lastly, of course, crisis funding facilitation. So because ReFED really sits at this nexus of the food waste community, we've got those connections to both the funders in the space yourselves and then those that are most in need. So if you want to flash forward, Dana, I'd love to talk a little bit about some of those opportunities specifically for funders like yourselves to get involved. So what I thought we'd do at the start here is just share a bit more in depth what we're hearing specifically from those on the ground frontline organizations doing that tireless work of ensuring food access and food security to that growing number of Americans that need help. As Dana mentioned, now I think, you know, up to 10 million of people have filed for unemployment claims. So via our stakeholder outreach, in terms of the current sentiment of the community, we're being told from individuals like Andrea Jaran, from Second Helpings Atlanta, that they're in triage mode. They're working in overdrive. Rick Nymus from Food Forward, he's seeing, quote, a complete upheaval of the programmatic workflows that they're doing. More broadly, what we're hearing is that organizations, as Dana hinted at, are lacking proper storage, especially that cold storage. Some organizations are seeing borrowed space that they've been using historically, restricting their access. So that's further exacerbating that problem. We're also seeing that demand for food access and distribution directly to end recipients is increasing exponentially. Many organizations are trying to amp up their distributions, of course, as they can secure labor, whether that's paid or volunteer. But that's another challenge, right? Because there's this growing shortage of labor, and the volunteer base that a lot of these organizations rely on, of course, are comprised of the elderly, which is a high risk population. And then lastly, if you want to go back just one more, Dana, these frontline organizations need funding to support the hiring and frankly retainment of staff members, as well as funding to replace and replenish their shelves. Because as Dana mentioned, these donations are drying up in certain areas. So in the face of these challenges, organizations are striving to meet demand for distribution and delivery of food by a few different means. So those means include piloting new services and programs to support the need during COVID-19. They're establishing rapid response volunteers and hiring drivers. They're conducting direct distribution to individuals, which is generally something new to the recovery space. There are some organizations that do it and do it well, but I would say overly, food recovery organizations are mostly transporting from donors to food banks or to food agencies. So you're seeing a lot more what I refer to as B2C or B to recipient. These organizations are empowering their communities to deliver food directly to those in need, and they're also building new partnerships. So a few best practices in action to give you a little bit of a flavor. We've got Boulder Food Rescue. They're actually distributing food directly to those food insecure individuals, as I mentioned, is kind of one of the trends we're seeing. They're also helping other food pantries do the same, and empowering this community or resident-led work so that neighbors that know of food insecure individuals are able to deliver that food to them. Oside Kitchen Collaborative, they're dealing with shortages in regular supply of donations by actually purchasing at-risk food inventory from their local restaurants. And then they're also using the funding to distribute any income from delivery meal sales to those that have been affected by restaurant closures. And they're looking to hire some of those former restaurant employees actually to help staff their labor shortages. And then finally, Second Servings Houston, they're addressing shortages in important infrastructure that they need by collaborating with an idled party tent rental company and local government agencies that have trucks so that they can do more large food pickups when they are available, of course. And then they've also started a mass meal production program in partnership with a local chef to feed those that are unemployed. And to give you an example of some of the growing impact, I would highlight again Food Servings of Houston, who just last month more than doubled what they normally rescue on a weekly basis in just one single day. So that means they distributed what for them is a record-breaking 13,000 pounds of fresh food. City Harvest, which is New York City's largest food rescue organization, they collected more than 3 times the amount of food they normally do in a 4-day period last month. And then Means Database, which is a food donation matching platform, they actually helped facilitate other nonprofits to rescue more than 670,000 pounds of food in just a 4-day span. So, you know, as we flip to the next slide here, as you can tell, there's some really fantastic work that's happening. People are stepping up and doing what they can given the resources that they have. But that being said, there's even more impact and, you know, that ability to overcome all of the challenges that need to be overcome are still being restricted, which is where what I've deemed just-in-time capital or just-in-time funding can be so instrumental. So via this surveying that we've done with frontline actors, kind of the main key areas that they're really looking for funding right now are one, just to ramp up normal operations to meet increased demand from those end recipients, people like you and me or food insecure people. They're launching those new emergency response programs to COVID. They want to build up their capacity to do pickups and deliver large scale and unscheduled or unpredictable donations as they come. They want to hire drivers. They want to get supplies, not only to deliver the food, but they also need the face masks and hand sanitizers to reduce that food safety risk. They've also had some disruptions in their just anticipated fundraising initiatives that they've been doing. So they've been banking on a big gala or whatever it is, and they're anticipating they won't be able to raise those funds as they normally would have. And then there's just general operating cost requests. So the good news is that via the surveying that we did with you guys ahead of this call, you know, the funders in our network that responded identified that around 2/3 of themselves have been providing additional funding already to their existing portfolio since the outbreak began. About half of those funders have actually given to new organizations since the crisis began. And every funder responded that they're planning to give either the same, if not more funding, but certainly not less in spite of or maybe because of the crisis. Now, of course, things are changing daily in this environment. So, who's to know if that stays the same, but at least for now, it does appear that there is money out there to be put to work. What I think is important is making sure that that capital is put to work in the most impactful way to really address the most pressing and urgent needs. So a couple of fundable initiatives that we've become aware of and that I wanted to kind of plant the seed in your guys' mind on this call. The first one that I'll mention is Replate. So of course, they're a California-based tech nonprofit. They have a national reach. They're looking for $50,000 to raise right now. For those of you who aren't familiar, the way that Replate works is traditionally they work with offices that feed their employees lunches or caterers that do events, and they recover that food. But given the closures in events and restaurants right now, how they're adapting to COVID is they're expanding their donation services to restaurants, those that are still open, as well as cafes instead of those offices, and they're doing that in partnership with DoorDash. They're also expanding their donation services and their capabilities to food banks and other relief organizations like Meals on Wheels or just central kitchens to power their logistics. And then lastly, same concept as I brought up before, but they're actually piloting delivery to homes in San Francisco and New York City specifically. So that's that B2C model that some of these organizations are piloting right now. Another example that I would highlight quickly here is Food Rescue US. So they're based in Norwalk, Connecticut. Again, they have a national reach and they're asking for $100,000. What they're trying to do to help fight COVID and add what they can to the space right now is they've launched 2 new programs. One is a community-led redistribution of food from local restaurants, and 2 community kitchens in Fairfield County and Miami is a program that they're running in partnership with the World Central Kitchen and the Marcus Samuelsson Group, where they're preparing meals and then delivering those directly to those in need. So they're seeking funding to support these 2 new programs. So the reality is that, those are just 2 examples of funding opportunity out there, but for every Replate and for every Food Rescue US, there are many other concrete needs for funding that, need help to ramp up their responses to the pandemic. And because of that, ReFED has developed this directory of funding needs in response to the crisis, which we're planning to regularly update. It is organized by geographic reach, and we hope that funders can use to find ways to deploy impactful capital. So what you're seeing on the screen here on the left side is just an idea of what that document will look like. As of today, we've got more than $19 million in asks from the food waste community in that. The actual document, as Dana mentioned at the top of the call, will come out to you when we send around this deck and the recording following today's conversation. But I would invite you to stay in touch with us. Let us know if you find other opportunities out there that need visibility and awareness, and we would love to add them to this living document. So to that end, I would love to call on Elizabeth Washburn from Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, assuming she's able to unmute herself, to take a minute and share with us another opportunity that she's seeing in the space and what they're doing in the face of the crisis.
Sure, thanks so much, Alex. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we've got you, Elizabeth.
Okay, great. And hi, Dana. Hey, everybody. This is Elizabeth Washburn from DRK. Just wanted to highlight another opportunity out of Southern California, which Alex actually mentioned. This is Rick Namias with Food Forward. Food Forward falls into the B2B category, and they focus on healthy, fresh produce. So their source for surplus food is the LA wholesale produce market, which is one of the country's largest, if not the largest. So it really is kind of a breadbasket. And then they deliver that, that produce free of charge to close to 2,000 hunger relief agencies across 7 SoCal counties, including the Inland Empire, which is particularly high need. And actually, I think, what Alex and Dana have said about record volumes holds true for them too. Last week was the largest in their history. They moved about 750,000 pounds of fresh produce just last week. because fortunately they recently built out a depot which enables them to hold and refrigerate inventory. So they're this really critical logistics hub, if you will. And they're continuing to work at full speed with the 2,000 agencies they serve, many of whom are expanding their own services. And they've also created a couple of new quote unquote hubs in Inglewood and east of LA, which is where different agencies can come to pick up produce at a central point so that Food Forward isn't always covering the last mile. They're also super efficient. In normal times, they do this work for just a few cents per pound of food. And again, they don't charge the recipient agencies. So they are looking for additional support just to meet this spike in need, which they believe is just the beginning. And I think all the categories that Alex mentioned around operating support to help adjust hygiene protocols in these times, those all pretty much apply to them. So particularly for those interested in opportunities in Southern California, wanted to go ahead and highlight them. And I'm happy to share more information or chat one-on-one with anyone who's interested.
That's fantastic, Elizabeth. Thanks for highlighting that. I've been meaning to go check out the depot. It's not too far from me in Los Angeles. I haven't had the chance yet.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah,
I was about to, and then I had to cancel my flight due to this. So
exactly.
One day soon.
Yeah, and maybe next I'd love to hear from Stephen Hoke, who is joining us on the line from the Ajana Foundation out in Massachusetts. Stephen, would love to hear about the opportunity that you're looking at there.
Sure. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me on the audio.
We've got you.
Okay, good. Well, hello, everyone. Our family is relatively new to this space, and we joined Jesse and the ReFED group a few years ago. And in getting up the learning curve, we've supported a number of local organizations that have been very innovative. The one I'd like to talk about today is Daily Table in Boston. And a number of you may know Doug Rao, who's the former CEO of Trader Joe's, who started it, I think in 2015. There are 2 stores in Boston, in Dorchester and Roxbury. And the business model is, and mission is to provide food insecure, economically challenged communities with access to affordable nutrition. And I don't think Doug describes it this way, but I've kind of dubbed it shopping with dignity. So it's not a handout. It's an environment, a very clean, attractive environment that sells fresh food and prepared meals, as well as providing education and recipes to communities that otherwise would typically be buying fast food. And the objective is to sell a good meal to a family for the same price as they would pay at a fast food restaurant. Since 2015, they've diverted 6.5 million pounds of food that otherwise would have been wasted. And they're looking to expand with a couple of more stores in the Boston area and then scale it to other geographies. Last week, I called Doug to see how we could help. And they have 3 specific needs right now, which touch very much on what Dana and Alex have already talked about. One is just providing and moving more food to families who are in need right now. The second is delivering healthy meals to seniors who are homebound and cannot get to stores to shop. And SNAP, the Daily Table shopping is SNAP eligible, but not for deliveries. So they're trying to come up with an innovative model to deliver the food directly to these homebound seniors. And the third that you've heard mentioned is compensating the Daily Table colleagues who are under tremendous stress right now and going the extra mile because they're not able to use the volunteers who would normally come in and help prepare the meals. And so they've added $2 per hour to each employee to just give them a bit extra right now and to retain them during this difficult period. And many of the employees do come from the community that's being served by the Daily Table stores. So what I suggested to Doug is that we help raise a matching gift challenge that they could put on their website and address their broader donor community to try to raise the funds they need. And Doug felt that an initial amount of $25,000 to $30,000 would be a good starting point for this campaign. And we've made a seed gift of about 1/3 of that amount. and would invite any other families who are interested to get in touch with us, and we can coordinate that together with Doug. What we've been hearing is a lot of families are looking for ways that they can quickly help these organizations get more food to the people who need it, and this is one way to do that. So happy to talk offline to anyone who's interested.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Stephen. And I absolutely love the Shopping with Dignity tagline that maybe you should trademark for them. It's a fantastic model. So with that, I think I'll kick it back over to you, Dana, to lead our discussion.
Yeah, no, thank you. Those are both, I think, really great examples, and along with the ones that Alex has mentioned. And I'm sure so many of you are busy doing your own work in this world. And so I think we, a couple of things. One is we did actually in the invitation to this webinar, and we'll do so in the follow-up as well, invite you to answer some questions for us. I think there's 7 or 8 of them, short ones, that kind of would help us get a sense of both how the funding community is reacting right now, and also how we can be helpful. And we've only had, I think it was at last count, about 9 funders answer that, but there were a couple interesting things that came out of that. One is that not one single respondent said that they plan to decrease the amount of funding that they were giving out over the coming year, despite the drastic changes in the market and all of that. Certainly, I think that's a fear not only of the food recovery organizations that we work with, but pretty much every nonprofit out there that relies on grant funding and donations. So I think that was kind of an interesting conclusion. And many of the people that responded were both giving more to organizations they supported now, and had already given to a new organization that they had not supported before. So that was fairly interesting as well, though not statistically significant yet. So if you're able to answer those questions for us, it would help us kind of build our understanding of what the funding community is doing, both to share out with you and also with the food recovery organizations we work with, who are certainly curious about that. But with that, we'd also just love to hear from you right now, anything you'd like to share around things you're hearing, best practices, innovative solutions, challenges, or other things you'd like us to have in mind at ReFED, or the other funders on the call to have in mind. So I believe Jackie has unmuted everyone's line. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Jackie, but if that's the case, perhaps we'll just open it up for discussion at this point.
This is Jackie Hindawi. I just wanted to make a comment and kind of ask a question. I think that psychologically, a lot of people, not just higher level philanthropists, are feeling very helpless, but not necessarily in a situation where we're worried about our own financials. And I'm talking, about people who are just in my community. For example, I live in Piedmont, and like a pretty wealthy community in the Bay Area. And I think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly around food waste, for people in the community to be able to donate. I think that feeling of helplessness is helped a lot by being able to feel like you're doing something, and sitting in your house like you can't do anything. So I've had a lot of friends ask me, where are you giving? And I think that there's right now such an opportunity with so many great small organizations to be able to support them. And I'd love to play a little bit of a role in my community of, people who maybe are just able to give $100 or $500, but you get 100 of those donations and it adds up to a lot. But I'd love your guys' support in thinking about what some of those smaller organizations are who might be able to support donations at a smaller level and support more of them. Because I think that it's hard for people to source those places, but makes people feel really good to be able to feel like they're doing at least something.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think those smaller organizations are the ones that are so strapped for labor in particular. And so not the ones able to go out there and ask for donations or sort of raise the funds right now in the way that some of the bigger organizations are kind of staffed up to do. So it makes it all the more important.
This is Kyle. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, Kyle, yeah.
Hi, thank you. That's Kyle Pug with Cal Recycle, and I just really wanted to thank you for this information today. Very helpful, and it's definitely affirming a lot of the things that we're hearing from our existing grantees within California, or food rescue grantees. And I just wanted to put a note out there to those that are listening that we will be reaching out to those grantees to see how the current circumstances have shifted their needs perhaps, and how maybe we can work within the confines of our grant program to shift some funding around if possible to help address that evolving need. So I wanted to put that out there too. And really look forward to seeing the additional resources that you guys are bringing to the table on food security as well. We are trying to share resources in-house for our Cal Recycle staff and families. So how we can expand that and share it more widely is always of interest. So thanks for everything and really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kyle. That's great to hear kind of you digging into your existing portfolio. I think that's a really important role that funders can play right now, not forgetting about those that have already kind of been welcomed to the family. I know that Sunny Realhorn Parr over at the Kroger Co. Zero Hunger, Zero Waste Innovation Fund is doing similar work with her portfolio, and I'm sure there are others on the line that are doing the same.
Dana, this is Rick Schneiders. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Rick. And Kyle, if you don't mind muting your line, that would be great. Go ahead, Rick.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for doing this. And the one thing I wanted to point out is that the produce that we're talking about, the fresh foods that we're talking about, produce specifically, thinking about the origin of those products. So McAllen, Texas, Yuma, Arizona, Nogales, Arizona, and now moving back into the Salinas Valley. And there are enormous opportunities, I think, to do food rescue at those points where we've got such an influx of the produce itself. And I would highlight the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona, which is doing a terrific job in the face of lost volunteers and other challenges, because last year they rescued 53 million pounds of produce that then went out to 33 different food banks around the country. And so if your giving needs are such that that would be of interest to you, the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona would be terrific.
Yeah, and we will, we're also adding them to our directory of fundable initiatives. So for those that want a little bit more of a primer on what they're looking for, look for that directory, and then of course connect with the team. That's a great recommendation.
I just want to pop in here. We've had a couple questions come in on the Q&A that I wanted to respond to. They're not kind of quite on the funding side, but I want to make sure we close the loop on those. One question was around, and they're kind of related, just e-commerce growth and its implications on waste reduction, and sort of saying a little bit more about that. And the other was around upcycling companies and companies like Imperfect Food or Hungry Harvest, whether if consumers are using them now, if they'll get used to them and that'll kind of have a lasting effect. And I think in some ways those are the same question, which is that there are, and we're certainly hearing, and I've heard directly from Imperfect Foods, I've heard from the small food hub in the town where I live, and several other examples of all of these places that provide like a box of produce at your door, that they're just exploding with more demand than they can handle right now. And I know that that's true also for just more traditional sort of e-commerce in grocery. the reason that, so I do think that there will be a lasting effect of that. I think certainly for those smaller companies, but even for larger ones, getting people to try online delivery is one of the biggest initial humps. And so I don't think everyone will stay, with those companies, but I do think there will be a step change in their consumer base. And actually, somebody at Imperfect Foods who I was speaking with told me that they were looking into kind of how lasting the change would be, and they looked at the SARS epidemic, and there's examples from the SARS epidemic of online grocery having a lasting increase after the SARS epidemic. The reason I think that has potential to actually ultimately serve to reduce the amount of food going to waste is twofold. I think the biggest kind of savings you get, and it has to be sort of with enough volume that they're not shopping at the grocery store, but where you have what they call dark stores. So if it's going directly from a warehouse to a consumer, you basically get to skip the brick and mortar step, right? And that means that at least from kind of an academic point of view for a moment, what it means is you avoid a lot of the waste that's sort of built into the brick and mortar approach, right? So there's food that gets displayed that maybe is displayed in bigger bowls or bigger piles of produce, and there's a certain amount of waste associated with that display. Sometimes when things are kind of out, certainly in produce, they're not always at the optimal temperature, so there's a period of time where they're not being stored at those optimal temperatures. And then there's just kind of an extra stop that the food's making along the way. So because of that, I think direct to consumer has the potential to skip some of the waste that happens in that stage. And then with certain models where people are ordering ahead of time, there's even more potential. The CEO of Fresh Direct in New York, which is an online only grocer, once said to me that if he had all of his orders 3 days in advance, he would have almost no waste, because if you can get them a few days in advance, that gives you sort of the ability to bring forward only what you need, and ultimately to purchase only what you need. So those are some of the reasons. So we are at time here, and ReFED always likes to end on time. So I just want to take this last opportunity to thank you all again. It truly is an opportunity to be able to share some of this with you all who have the potential to really make a difference in this. So please follow up with us if you have questions. We will send out both the recording as well as that list of fundable opportunities and a link to those few survey questions that I mentioned. And just know that I think we see this as kind of the beginning of something and not just a one-time thing. So we'd like to keep this conversation going. And if there are ways that you can see us being helpful, we would certainly love to hear about them. And with that, I will say thank you and enjoy your day. Stay well, everyone. Stay healthy.